Here we are at our example 1 from our measuring and classifying notes. Now we're asked to find the measure for each of these angles as well as classify them. And in the video, it described that we're going to have our vertex here at the center of our protractor. And a lot of times we usually have our starting angle occur on as this ray going outward on the right side. And a lot of times we read our angle measures in a counterclockwise manner. A lot of times we do that. We don't always do that, but a lot of times we do. Okay? And what I mean by that is we're starting where it's going through that zero ray right here, and then it extends to the vertex, and then it goes up through the other ray. Now, when we're reading it in a counterclockwise manner, we're saying that we're starting off at 0 degrees, and then going to 10 degrees, then 20, then 30, then 40. And we notice that we're going in that counterclockwise manner, then through 50, and then this does go through about 55 degrees. So that will be the angle measure for this angle. So again, the measure of this angle is about 55 degrees. And we don't have it as like a specific label like we saw in some of the earlier definitions. Like, for example, it doesn't say, find this angle A. If it did, then we would just put a little A here. But we don't have those letters or any other like letters outside for our array. So we're just going to go ahead and label them all measure of angle A, just for the sake of consistency. For this next one, again, we have our vertex. It extends throughout that ray. And then going in that counterclockwise fashion, there's 10, 20, 30, 40, and so on, all the way. There's 110 right there, all the way until we get to 135 degrees. So the measure of this angle, again, we're just going to call it A. So the measure of angle A is 135 degrees. And the classification for these, our first one would be an acute angle because it's smaller than 90 degrees. Whereas our 135 degrees, we would classify that as an obtuse angle. So again, that's our classifying component. For our next two, again, we have kind of our start point going through 0. There we're at our vertex. Again, we're just going to call it A for right now. And then it goes through some value. Goes through our other part of the ray. Now, this is going through 10, 20, 30, 40. And it looks like halfway between 40 and 50, so 45 degrees would be that angle measure. So we're going to say that the measure of angle A is 45 degrees. And that would, again, because it's between 0 and 90 degrees, give us an acute angle. Moving on toward our next angle, we have our vertex going through that ray at 0. And then it extends outward. And we notice that it's going up a little bit through that ray right there. There's 10 degrees, there's 20, 30, and all the way around until we get to, there's 160, and it looks like, again, this is between 160 and 170, so a measure of angle 165 degrees seems most appropriate for this angle right here. So the measure of angle A comes out to be 165 degrees. And that is between 90 and 180 degrees, which would then give us that obtuse angle. Now again, a lot of times we read things, reiterating that idea of reading things from counterclockwise. And when you read it like that, we're going to be using those values inside. And notice how they just continue to go up and up and up and up and up and up in that fashion. Whereas the next examples, we're going to read just normal clockwise. So what I mean by that is we have our vertex. right here. Again, we're just going to call this A. And it's extending, but it's not extending over this way. Instead, we notice that it's going the other way. That ray is starting off at 0 in the other direction. Well, that's fine. You can do that. But what that does then is it shifts your measure angle to the outside for your protractor. So instead of going here and saying it's 170 degrees, well, that wouldn't make a whole lot of sense because then you'd have a really small angle that's 170 degrees. That doesn't make any sense. Instead, we're starting out with these outside numbers. So for example, there's 10 degrees if I connected those. And there is 20 degrees and 30 degrees. So now they're starting to get bigger to meet that final ray that we need it to get to. And so when we look at these angle measures, reading this in a more clockwise version, we see 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, and so on, all the way until we get to the measure of angle, looks like 160 degrees. So in this case, the measure of angle A comes out to be 160 degrees, which again is an obtuse angle, because that's between 90 and 180. Last one. Here's our vertex. It's going through our ray, but this time on that 0 value on the left side. And we're reading it going up to and through that value. So that looks like we have a measure of angle 10, 20, 30, and so on all the way. We notice that it's past 70 and possibly halfway between 70 and 80. So, yep, it is exactly halfway between 7 and 80. So then that would be a measure of angle 75 degrees. So the measure of angle A in this case is equal to 75 degrees. And since that is between 0 and 90 degrees, that would be an acute angle. And now you might be sitting there and you might be saying, okay, that's great, Mr. B, but I really want to know one. Maybe it's a little bit harder to tell, because we've had a lot of in-betweens or perfect angles. So let's see one where maybe it's a little bit harder. Well, the game is still the same. You're still going to kind of have a start ray and an end ray. However, it's going to end at some angle that you need. So for example, what I mean by that is, suppose we still have our vertex at A here, and it's going through our start ray, 0. And suppose it goes through, we'll say, it's a little bit hard to see, but imagine it's going through there. So notice how that angle is not exactly between 40 and 50 degrees. It's somewhere a little bit beyond 45 degrees. And so what you kind of have to do is look very, very carefully and kind of give it your best visual estimation as to what you think it is. So for example, what I mean by that is, because I am 2 tick marks away from 50 degrees, I am at 48 degrees. Okay? So you just have to play with it a little bit so that you can get a more precise degree calculation. All right? Just one more quick example of that would be, for example, we'll go with an obtuse guy this time. We have our start ray going through 0, and then an obtuse, maybe it's going through there. So notice how that's not exactly between 130 and 140. It's closer to 130. You might have to try and estimate to the best of your ability that might be 133 degrees. It looks pretty close to 133. Okay. So again, that's where it gets a little bit more precise with your angle measures. But again, though, that is example 1 from our measuring and classifying angles notes.